Hey peeps, today we're going to take a look at a game called Qwixx, which is, this edition from the game is from Gamewright Games. The game has actually been released over in Europe for at least a few years now, I believe, and they even went ahead and released an edition of the game that was cards instead of dice. So the game's been around a while, but now Gamewright has a new edition. And it's kind of hard to describe this game. It is a dice game that's got some push your luck elements and also bingo elements. It's very quick and easy to learn, like a lot of different Gamewright games. And, well, I don't know. Let's go ahead and just do an overview. There's not really much else I could say about it. Then we're going to come back and I'll let you know what I think. Qwixx is a push your luck dice game mixed with bingo for 2 to 5 players. This is the entirety of the game here, minus the pencil. You have 2 regular dice, you have 4 different colored die, and you have a whole pad of these sheets which are double-sided so you can get even more use out of them. The whole goal of this game is to get as many points as possible by the time one of the game's 2 ending triggers is reached. The 2 ending triggers are when 2 of the colored dice are locked out of the game or when someone has filled up their 4 penalty boxes. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at the sheet that comes with the game. Now, there are 4 different colored rows here you see, and of course these are going to be significant for towards the colors of the dice as well. You see that the red and yellow rows go from 2 to 12, and then they have a picture of a lock. And there's also, it's kind of hard to see, but there's actually a line separating the furthest number from the right from the rest of the numbers. Then the green and, this is actually blue, believe it or not. The die is blue, this looks like purple, but whatever. The green and blue rows go from, in reverse order, 12 to 2, also with the lock. Underneath that, this little row here is just scoring. So this game is all about scoring X's. So if you have X's in these rows, at the end of the game, you're going to look at how many X's you have in each row and then calculate that to determine your score. And then directly underneath that, you have boxes matching up to each color, so you'll mark your score for each row in there. And then this white box links up with these little boxes here, which are penalty boxes. If every penalty box that you have filled in at the end of the game is worth -5 points, that's actually one of the game ending conditions as well. If someone fills in all 4 of their penalty boxes, the game immediately ends. The game also ends if 2 of these locks on any player's sheet are crossed off. But how do you get to all that point? What does all of that mean? Now, you'll determine who's going to go first, and whoever is the active player, the player who's actually rolling the dice, is going to roll all 6 of the die. The first thing, your turn is broken down into 2 steps. The first step is always to take the 2 white die, look what the number is, and then every player at the table is allowed to look at their sheet and mark off whatever total number that is. So in this case, we have an 8. That means I can look at any row on my sheet and cross off an 8. I have my choice. It could either be the red or the yellow or the green and the purple. Now, you'll note that because these go in reverse order, the green and the purple actually have their 8s farther to the left than the red and the yellow. But why does this really matter? Well, that's because if you choose to cross off, so put an X through a number, you can no longer go back and cross off any of the numbers that come before it going to the left. So if I cross off the red 8, I can never ever fill in or cross off the 2 through 7 of red. In fact, the book recommends, and this is what we do as well, just go ahead and put a horizontal line through all those boxes to remind you that you will never ever be able to cross those off. Now, this is important for 2 different reasons. Number 1 is that, of course, like I mentioned before, every X in every row counts towards points at the end of the game. The more X's, the better your points multiply. But also, you want to try your best to have 5 X's before the final number in each row. That's what the significance of this black line is here that marks off the 2 12s and the 2 2s. If you can get 5 X's in a row, you are then eligible to mark off that final number. You are not allowed to mark off either of the 12s or either of the top 12s or the bottom 2s unless you have 5 X's before that number. And when you do mark off that last number in each of those, you're also allowed to cross off the lock for that row. Not only does that count as yet another X, the lock X also counts for an X, but it means that that number, or that color, is locked out of the game. As soon as that happens, everyone finishes marking their X for that action. And then you get to take that die and remove it from the game. And no other player, including yourself, will ever be able to mark off another red. That's it. That color is done. The game continues, but if 2 of those colors get locked out, then the game is also going to end. Now, I mentioned that was all just step 1, taking the 2 white die and then marking off, and every player getting the chance to mark off a number is just step 1 of the active player's turn. Step 2 is only for the active player. Only the active player gets to do this, and what they get to do is look at the 4 colored dice, take one of those 4 colored dice of their choice, and match it up with one of the white dice. So with this allotment here, I could take the green 6 and they're both 4s, so maybe that's a bad example, but here we'll do a 3. So I could take the green 6 with the white 4 and mark off the 10 box of the green row. Or I could do the 7 of red, or if I did the 3 instead, I could do the 6 of red, or the 7 of yellow, and so on. You have your choice, but you can only do 1, and this is only the active player that gets to do this second part of the turn. Now, of course, you're following the same limitations here, and you might not be able to cross off something if you've gone too far up the row, but just like with the active players, with the step 1 where every player gets to do it, if you happen to be able to link up a 12 or a 2 of the corresponding row, then you are able to mark off the lock as well. Assuming that the game doesn't end, you're going to pass all the dice that have not been locked out to the next player, and then they proceed doing the 2 steps. So you always do the first step with the 2 white dice for every player, and the second step is always linking up 1 colored die with a white die only for yourself. And that's the game. You're going to keep going around, passing the dice, marking off X's where you can, trying to get as many X's as you can, trying to be in a race to be the first one to lock off a row. I'm sorry, I didn't even explain how you get penalty boxes. On your turn, you are not required to fill in an X for either step of your active player turn. And in fact, you might not be able to. Well, if you're not able to, or if you're just completely unwilling to do so, you must mark off one of your penalty boxes. So if you don't take at least 1 X on your active player turn, then you must mark off a penalty box. If you're not the active player and you just choose not to mark down an X for the 2 white dice, that's fine. You don't take an X, but you don't take a penalty box. But if you're the active player and you don't mark an X, that's what you're going to have to take, which are bad. Those are -5 points. So keep passing the dice around, try to avoid penalty boxes, try to get as many X's as possible, and when the game ends, be the person with the most points. That is Qwixx. Qwixx is both very fun and very, very infuriating. This is a dice game, which means that you live and die on those dice, and there's not much else you can do about it if you end up getting a crappy roll. Now, that's not to say that there's not decision-making in this game, because there is. Right from the very get-go, you have to decide. If you end up with a number that is somewhere in the middle of one of those rows, what are you going to do? Now, that sounds very simple, and it sounds like it's not that deep a decision, but it really is, because that's going to set the tempo for the rest of your game. If you choose a number right in the middle of a row, then you are making the decision that you are giving up every number before it, which limits it. Aside from the fact that you're not going to be able to get as many X's, you are limiting your ability to make decisions later in the game, because when those dice come up with a number that you cannot possibly go back to on any of the rows, that is extremely frustrating. And that's just the very nature of the game. I have not won this game yet, despite playing it like 5 times, but even so, I like it. I like the concept behind it. I like how easy it is to learn, how easy it is to play, how fast it is, and the fact that there is just enough decision making here to make it less than just a futile dice chucking exercise. But it is dice chucking. That is something that's, and for people that hate the sheer randomness of it, there may not be enough here to keep you invested. But I think that they sort of balance the two pretty equally here. I like the whole concept of the race, that it is a race to fill up a row with as many X's as possible, because if you get that magical 5 X's and then someone miraculously gets either a 12 or 2, depending on what row that you're in, you get to lock off that lock. So this is a race game, and I like that pressure. Now, it's interesting because in the first game of this that we played, no one marked off a single penalty box, to the point where I thought, wow, that's a pretty insignificant part of the game. But that was just our first game, and I think that we were playing it a little safer, so people had more options, and things just moved a lot more slowly. In future games, those penalty boxes were filling up fast, because people realized how much of a race that it was, and they were taking risky gambles. And when I'm saying people, I'm also mostly referring to me. If I see a 7, I'm going to take it. If I see a 6, I don't care if it's the first round, I'm going to take it because I want X's. But that's not always the best thing to do because you're limiting your options later on, and that leads to more and more penalty boxes. In the beginning, you're like, how am I ever going to take a penalty box? Of course I'm going to be able to use, if I'm the active player, at least I'm going to be able to put down 1 X. There's no way it's ever going to happen. And then it happens, and it is extremely infuriating. And you just see yourself falling further and further behind. So, having said that, though, I like this game. I like this game a lot. I think that it is eminently playable with all kinds of different groups of people, whether it, young, old, even younger kids, I think can pretty easily pick this one up. And because of its abstract nature, there's no theme or anything to it, it's going to be kind of universally acceptable to a lot of people. Do I think that there's better filler type games? Yeah. But then again, I don't really have one like this. This is a very different than another game like Fairy Tale or Sushi Go or Love Letter. This is a little more, when you add that push your luck element to probability and odds, it makes it kind of just a little bit puzzly, and I like that. I like just that dash of it in there mixed with the randomness. So I give this one a pretty high recommendation. I was very surprised by this. I wasn't expecting too much, and maybe because I set that bar low, it really exceeded my expectations. The component-wise, the dice are nothing to really get too excited about, but, like some other Game Right games, I really like the box that this comes in. I mean, it sits very nicely on the shelf. You can take this anywhere with you, and I think it's one that you should definitely consider doing that with, because for the price and for what it is, it's a very fun game. My name is Nick, this has been Board Game Brawl, and I'm reminding you to get out there and game every day in every way. Take care.